So good evening, everyone, all the participants. So welcome to the 18th lecture of the series Emerging Trends in Biophysics, which is jointly organized by Homi Bhabha National Institute and Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics. This particular lecture is the third lecture in the sub-series Single Molecular Spectroscopy, where we are discussing how the knowledge of single molecular spectroscopy is changing the way we monitor or we understand processes inside the nature's nanomachine, that is inside the cell. When we think or when we talk about monitoring at at single molecular resolution, the very first question that strikes is why to monitor at single molecular resolution? There could be two answers to this question. One, if we are talking about the biological processes, majority of the biological processes happens at single molecular resolution. I have explained those things in my previous lectures. Second, there are many processes, the real processes that happens inside the cell or outside the cell, where changes happen at very tiny scales, like in nanometer scale. Those tiny little scale changes we cannot monitor using a conventional method or an ensemble method. That is because we discussed that there is no way we can go beyond the diffraction limit if we are using a microscope where we visualize things, and if you are using a microscope, the best resolution that we can go is like about lambda by 2. So we cannot go in nanometer resolution. At the same time, when you are talking about biological processes inside the cell, we know that there are many processes, many molecules inside the cell that display very fast, instantaneous dynamics, and those behavior are mostly random and stochastic in nature. I explained those things also. And because those behaviors are random and stochastic, if we monitor the signals from those molecules, we get a fluctuation. And we see that the fluctuations that we get from those molecules dominate the behavior of the system. And many of the times we also find those molecules, they coexist at multiple steps. However, we are talking about ensemble methods. If we talk about the ensemble methods where we monitor lot of molecules together, we cannot monitor those processes. For example, if you see there are a lot of molecules, if you even take 1 microliter of 1 micromolar solution, that contains about 6 into 10 to the power 14 molecules, which is 75,000 higher than today's population. Within that population, it's very difficult to monitor them and to synchronize their properties. However, if you stop looking for the entire molecule, entire system, and you just concentrate on a particular area where you have like very few molecules, there the probability of getting those details information about the fluctuation become more. So you get better information when you look for a tiny area, and that is the concept of fluorescence correlation spectroscopy, where you dilute the sample and you monitor a very tiny excitation area. So when you again talk about the ensemble measurement, because there are a lot of molecules I showed you, the information that we receive there are mostly unsynchronized averaging of trillions of molecules. And that's why those bulk measurements, those ensemble measurements, they mostly obscure dynamical behavior and maps the information about processing through a biochemical process. But when we talk about single molecular resolution, we have already discussed, those kind of things are not there. Synchronization is not required. The dynamical process behavior is not obscured. That is because you are monitoring every molecule individually and you directly monitor their immunity properties. So you can monitor their tiny little movements, any conformational changes, like force generation, possessive motions, and many more things like this. We have already discussed. I have given an introduction to single molecular, the advantages of single molecular methods in the first lecture of this substance. Still, when you talk about the biological processes, we know that there are many questions that comes to our mind. How do processes occur single molecular level? How do we monitor them? And how do they tell about the mechanical properties, the mechanism of the reactant to the products? How noisy those signals are, because when you talk about fluctuations, we get a noisy spectra, and how noisy those processes are. That also depends on the participation of just few molecules or many molecules. And can we learn something from the fluctuations? By observing those fluctuations constantly over a period of time, can we learn anything from those fluctuations? This is what the basics of fluorescence correlation spectroscopy. And particularly when we talk about the cell, there are many processes where this kind of fluctuations happen, this kind of movement of molecules, which we usually call that diffusion, happens inside the cell, outside the cell, from outside to inside, from inside to outside. So diffusion appears to be a very common phenomena inside the cell. And when there is diffusion, there is possibility of these fluctuations. I'm sure most of you know what diffusion is. Like the concept of diffusion is nothing but like movement of any particle from a higher concentration to a lower concentration, area of lower concentration. This concept of diffusion was first observed by Robert Brown in mostly 1828 when he was carrying out some experiment using some pollen grains, where he took this pollen grains and suspended inside a cuvette and suspended in water, and he was monitoring that thing under a microscope. That is the first time when he saw this kind of motions, zigzag motions of those pollen grains. Initially, he thought those zigzag motions are nothing but some kind of live processes which is happening. But later he found that it is not a live process, because he even tried to hit the entire system and tried to kill the pollen grains. And once he found that there is no life, still those kind of phenomena is happening. And he also found that instead of taking like pollen grain or its cell or anything, when he took particles of any particles of this sort of size, he found this kind of zigzag motions. And then he said it's not related to the phenomena that is because of any life process, rather because of some thermal process, it's a spontaneous fluctuation because of the thermal motion. So this, if you think about this thermal motions, always you can see these particles. If you just check on this bottom, like the particles always go from an area of higher concentrations to a lower concentration, but it's not be confused that there is any force which is actually pulling them. Well, there could be a force. If you check that thing, it appears like there is a force, and that force is nothing but the entropic force, and no external force which is responsible for this diffusion. You can pretty much calculate the kinetic energy of those diffusing particles. So this kinetic energy of this diffusion particle can be just calculated from this equation. E is equal to 1 by n, 1 n by 3 v mass into v V square. And from the ideal gas equation, you know that PV is equal to KNT. And you can just correlate these two equations and you can find that 3 kT by 2 is equal to mass times the average of the velocity square by. And from there, if you know the mass of a particle, like for example, if you know the mass of nitrogen molecule, which is 0.7 into 10 power 26 kilogram at room temperature, you can calculate the velocity using that equation. So for nitrogen, if you calculate, this is about 508 meter second inverse. But is that velocity, is it effective enough to transport system using the speed? And the question is, because it's a very random motion, what happens when the diffusion happens, these molecules keep traveling, but there are many times where like other particles come into their path, and that's why the movement is not very straight. If the motion is not in a straight line, you cannot carry out, because you keep bombarding with other particles and you come back, and this process happens till a equilibrium is reached. However, you can distribute, if you check a particular area of this Brownian motion, you can calculate the population distribution in that particular area, and you can see that the population distribution pretty much depends upon the size of the particles, the nature of the medium, the nature of the particles, and many more things. However, instead of taking any particle, what can be done? If you want to monitor the fluorescence of this kind of particles, you can either tag those molecules with a fluorophore, or you can just take some fluorophore molecules. If you tag those particles with a fluorophore, directly take fluorophore molecules and keep observing this small area. So what you get, and you keep monitoring the intensity in that particular area, what do you get? You get intensity fluctuation. Why you get intensity fluctuation? Because if you check carefully, there are particular times where when the number of particles inside that observed volume is more, sometimes the number of particles inside the observation volume is less. So, and because as you are monitoring the fluorescence intensity, so we get a fluctuation, because the intensity is directly proportional to the concentration of the fluorophores. So if the concentration is changing or the number of particles are changing, we'll see a change in the fluctuation. And in other words, if in a particular area the number of particles are changing, instead of getting a straight fluorescence curve, what we get is a fluctuation. And this is the basic of the basic concept of fluorescence correlation spectroscopy, where we monitor the fluctuations, fluorescence fluctuation, and correlate it using a particular function that is called as a correlation function. I'll tell you what correlation function is in a few slides. So in FCS, what is done is, instead of looking for a particular area, a very Gaussian beam profile is created. I have already explained what Gaussian beam profile is. A Gaussian beam would look something like this, where the intensity is less here. If you remember the things I was explaining in optical tweezer, I have explained how you create a Gaussian beam using a laser. So you create a Gaussian beam. So here intensity is less here, intensity is less here, but the intensity is more at the center. So whenever any fluorescence particle or fluorescence trap particle passes through that, if there is no molecules, we don't see any intensity, but as there is molecules keep passing through, depending upon how many molecules are passing, you get an intensity, and that's why it's fluctuating. You can get the mean fluctuation, and once you get the mean fluctuation, you can find out how much time that molecule is staying in that excited volume also, and then you can find out So that correlation function will eventually tell you the nature of those fluctuations. So once we monitor the fluctuations, like why fluctuations are important, but because when you monitor the fluctuations in a tiny volume, as I said, the number of molecules are less, and the number of molecules are less means you get information from probably few molecules. So the question might be like, why we want to monitor few molecules? Because if you are only monitoring the fluctuation, again I'll show you in a couple of slides that the less number of molecules means you get more fluctuations. The fluctuations are more results, and you get more information from them. And what are the informations you can get from the fluorescence fluctuations? You can get the number of molecules. I'll convince you later that as the number of molecules increases, the fluctuation decreases, and as the number of molecules decreases, the fluctuation increases. So because the fluctuation again depends upon the, as I said, the fluctuation depends upon the number of molecules, we can calculate the, we can get the information about the particle concentration. You can, if we monitor the diffusion of these particles, how fast or how slow it is moving, we can find out the interaction. And if depending upon how many molecules are there, like sometimes more molecules, sometimes less molecules, and if more molecules are there, you get a bright signal. If there are less molecules, you get a less bright signal. So you get information about oligomerization, any kind of interactions, and many other information that I will discuss in the next slides. So to understand this fluorescence correlation spectroscopy, two things we need to understand is like how, what is a fluctuation is and what is a correlation function is. Let's say not only equilibrium process, a biological process. If you are monitoring it, I'll just explain how these fluctuations are developed. This is what my target is here, to explain why these fluctuations are important and what information we get from the fluctuations. Let's say we are just considering a reaction A plus B, any kind of chemical reaction at equilibrium, where A plus B is giving a product, a B, and we can define the forward reaction constant at equilibrium constant at Kf, and the backward reaction constant at Kb. If we just monitor the concentration and of the reactant product, we see that the concentration of the product keeps increasing with time. This is a very common thing that we must have seen in chemical kinetics, where the concentration of product is very less here. It keeps increasing at the intermediate time. The concentration, the change of product, the change of reactant to product is the rate of change of reactant to product is higher, and after some time it reaches a equilibrium. If we can define the rate equations. We can define a couple of rate equations considering all these concentrations of A, B, and AB, Kf, and Kb, like the rate of change of product with time can be defined as the Kf times concentration of reactant, product of concentration of reactant, minus Kb time concentration of product. Similarly, the rate of change of concentration of A with time or the rate of change of concentration B with time is going to be same, minus Kf time, because the concentration is decreasing, Kf and Kb are decreasing, the A concentration and concentration B are decreasing, so it's minus Kf times concentration of A, concentration of B, plus Kb time concentration of AB. So this is going to be same for rate of change of B with time or rate of change of A with time. We can find out the equilibrium constant, which is Kf by Kb, which is going to AB by A plus B. Very fundamental equations, we have learned it. If we just check the progress of the reaction, let's say at this place where the product is still forming and the reactant is still consuming, there are some reactant, there are some product, and you just zoom this part. What you can see is some forward process, some forward reaction, some forward reaction, some forward reaction, followed by a backward reaction, followed by a forward reactions. So forward, 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 followed by a backward. So this is how it happens till the time it reaches the equilibrium. We are just considering a case where the reaction has not reached to equilibrium. So what you see there is the number of forward processes are higher, which are predominant compared to the number of backward processes. However, if you just check the equilibrium here, the process at once the reaction reaches a equilibrium and zoom it, what you can see that forward followed by backward, forward, backward, forward, backward, and this is how it goes. So there is a constant conversion between forward processes and backward processes. So what exactly it means that the reactant is constantly making the product, and the product is falling to breaking down to reactant and reactants. Again, reactant is making to product, but that happens at a very slow scale. That's why. So there is a equilibrium between the forward processes and backward processes, and it appears like if you see the equilibrium processes where the fluctuations are like at equilibrium EV, there are fluctuations. The fluctuations arise because of the forward processes are being equilibrated. The backward processes, their products keep breaking down to reactant, and reactant keeps making product. So there is equilibrium. And if you keep looking for this equilibrium, you get more information about the reactant, how the reactant has happened, how fast the reactant was happening, and many other information from this process. You don't have to look for the kinetics how fast. So many of the times, actually, the kinetics, the reaction happen at very fast scale. You don't even get to know about the kinetics. But still, if you keep looking for these fluctuations of the equilibrium also, though the kinetics rates are not there, you still can get information about the entire processes. This is the concept of monitoring the fluctuations at equilibrium. So once you monitor these fluctuations, the things that you can monitor is like, as I said, you can monitor diffusion, you can monitor enzyme activity, you can monitor phase separations, phase fluctuations, conformational dynamics, rotational motions, protein folding, DNA-protein interaction, and many more things like that. These are some of the processes that show fluctuations in the signal we monitor in a confined value. So once you generate, now I think I convinced you why fluctuations are important while measuring the fluorescence correlation spectroscopy. Now I'll tell you what exactly correlation is. Just I'll use a couple of examples to explain you what correlation is and how you develop or how you define the correlation function. How you define the correlation functions. So what is correlation? Correlation is nothing but finding the similarity between two signals. Okay, so what exactly it means is how similar two signals are at two different times probably. Well, let me just explain what correlation is mathematically, then I'll explain you. I'll just explain taking some examples which will make the things to understand, which will make it easier to understand. And then I guess you will understand how fluctuation, how you get the projection function. So you said two functions, a function is said to be in correlation if the average of AB is not equal to average of A times average of B. Is it clear? Well, let me explain it a bit. Let's say that we just assign some values to A and B. If we assign some values to A and B, let's say that A and B can only take values either 1 or 0 randomly, and they take the values with equal probability. Either 1 or 0, but they take with equal probability. Then how you define what is average of A, what is average of A times average of B, what is average of AB. So if A and B can take only values 1 and 0, then the values can be 1 is either 0 or 1. So the average of A is, like there are two values that A can take. So the average of A is 0 plus 1 by 2, which is going to be 0.5. The same, the average of B is going to be 0.5 also. So both are average of A and average B are 0.5. I guess I'm able to convince you. So what is average of A times average of B? 0.5 times 0.5, that is 0.25. Then what is average of AB? Okay, to understand what average of AB, let's find out what values A into B can take. What values AB can take? Both can be 0, 0, one case. Either A can be 1, B can be 0. A can be 0, B can be 1, or both can take 1, 1. Right? So in that case, A into B here is going to be 0. A into B here is going to be 0. A into B here is going to be 0. A into B here is going to be 1. So what is the average? 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 1 by 4. Because 1/4 of AB turns to be 1 and rest are 0. So the average of AB is going to be 0.25 because 1 by 4, that is 0.25. So the average of AB turns to be 0.25. So now you can see the average of A times average of B is equal to the average of AB. That's same. I said the function is said to be correlated if a average of AB is not equal to average of A times average of B, but here that turns to be same. So in this function, when A and B can take any value of 1 and 0 randomly with equal probability, this function you can say that it is not correlated. Okay, so take one more example. Now assume A and B can take always the same value. Then what is going to be average of A times average B? Again, if A and B can take always a value, the same value, that means A can be 1 when B is 1, or A is 0 when B is 0. Still, A have the value either 1 or 0. So average of A is going to be 0.5, average of B is going to be 0.5. So average of A times B is going to be 0.25. What is going to be average of A times B? So what are the values AB can take? 0, 0 or 1, 1. If the AB can take only 0, 0 and 1, 1, then this turns to be 0, this turns to be 1. So 50% of product of AB gives 1 and 50% of them gives 0. So average of AB becomes 0.5, 1 by 2. That means product of A times product of average of B is not equal to average of AB. Average of AB is greater than average of A times average of B. So here you can say that this is correlated, and this is correlated because AB is greater than A times B. A average of A times average B. I will take another example where we have A and B, and we assume that A and B always take the opposite value. If A and B always take the opposite value, still I think you are convinced by now, average of A times average B is going to be 0.25, same, because average of A is 0.5, average of B is 0.5. So what is the value of A into B? What are the values A and B can take together as they take the opposite values? When A is 1, B is 0, or when A is 0, B is going to be 1. That means A into B here is 0, A into B here is 0. So the average of A, B is 0 by 2, which is 0. So that means the average of A times average of B is greater than average of AB. AB is smaller than this. In this case, it is called as, it's correlated, but it's called as anti-correlated because it's less than the average of A times average of B. I think, do you understand how you say that whether a signal is correlated or a function is correlated or a function is not correlated? So let's take, so if they are correlated, that means average of A is not equal to average of B, and you can find out, you can define a correlation function, average of B by average of A times average of B. In that case, this G is called as the correlation function, small g, just for a regular function. If it is equal to 1, that means it's not correlated. That's what I explained. If it is greater than 1, it's called as correlated. If it is less than 1, it is anti-correlated. So similar, what you can do is you can define this correlation function as a function of time. It can be monitored as, if you are monitoring some sort of signal, it can be monitored as a function of time. B can be monitored as a function of time. There you can define the autocorrelation function as A times T, A as a function of times, into B as a function of time, divided by average of A as a function of time into B as a function of time. This is going to be the correlation function. Many of the explanations, many of the references you can find, there is a epsilon factor mentioned here, because many of the times the correlation function, when you find out the correlation function, that you consider many other functions like all the data are not correlated, there are some viscosity effects, some other effects, so epsilon factor is there. But you can define the correlation function like this. What you can do now, so I explained what correlation function is, but two functions. What you can do, instead of looking for two functions at a particular time, what you can look, like particularly when we are talking about fluorescence signal, or let's say a function we were talking, a function, instead of looking for two functions, you can monitor a particular function at two different times. And you can still define the correlation function, like A at a particular time and A at a time with tau difference, like A at time t into A into time t plus tau. If you find the correlation function for that, that is called as the autocorrelation functions. We are finding the correlation function for a safe signal at two different time intervals, at a small time interval. And there, if you find that when you monitor the signal at two different time interval, if they are correlated, you can say that if in that case, if average of AB is not equal to average of A into average of B, then you can say it is correlated. So if you just like consider the case when no difference, you are monitoring the same signal at the same time, AT and AT plus tau for the same signal, but there is no change. If that means my average of AT is same as average of AT tau. because there is no change in the signal, let's say. Then it is called as the stationary phase. You can say if you just replace AT and T plus tau, they are same. You can find the correlation function for the stationary phase as AT into AT plus tau by AT square. Well, you can do the same thing for a function which happened earlier. If it has happened earlier, like sometime before the time when you are monitoring, that also you can do. You can monitor the correlation function for a time happened bit earlier than the time t. There you can define the correlation function as AT minus tau by AT square, because you have already defined AT and T plus tau is same. So AT and AT minus tau are same. So AT into A minus tau, that if you just add plus tau, which we can do because the phase is stationary. So we monitor the system bit earlier at a time less than t. We are monitoring at t and we are monitoring t plus tau. So you can just add tau to that and you can see g. You can define the correlation function a t plus tau plus a t by a t plus tau square. A t plus tau square is nothing but a t square as we have defined here, which is basically gt. So that the whole point of describing this thing is if the signals are correlated, if you monitor sometime before and sometime after, and if you see that the functions are the correlation functions are almost same, they are called to be a symmetrical correlation function at time. Okay, so we define the correlation function, and you know that what a correlation, what is the symmetrical correlation type. Let's say we have a signal. When we are talking about the signals inside the fluorescence correlation inside the small volume, let's say we have a signal, and we are just monitoring that signal just before some time, at that time, and this time at different time interval. How it happens is, you can see as the signal keep moving, as it keep moving and come closer and exactly moves to exactly overlaps with the signal, we get a bigger correlation. And when it's like away from the curve, the difference is more, the correlation is less. And once it overlaps, we get a higher correlation, and eventually the correlation again becomes less once you go away. This is an example of a symmetrical correlation functions. Okay. How do you create a autocorrelation function? I think I explained what autocorrelation function is. How do you create a autocorrelation function? Let's say we have a Gaussian beam profile, and in that Gaussian beam profile also, suppose we are just monitoring a small area. Just somehow we are using a pinhole, let's say, and monitoring a very small area. And we have a molecule here which is in a Brownian motion, and it will pass through that small area. Once it passes through that small area, the photon, and comes out of this Gaussian beam profile, we see a photon burst, because inside if you are exciting that thing with a laser, we get a fluorescence signal, we get a photon burst, and we can copy the same signal after some short time also. So we can say like that at t and at change in intensity at as a function of t, and change in intensity at some time which is t plus tau. If you just part of this correlation function is the positive side. If you remember the correlation function I just showed in the previous slide, this is the correlation function. I'm not showing the correlation function on this side. I'm not showing g minus tau. I'm just showing g tau. So you can see, like I explained, when the signals are almost overlapped, you get a higher correlation at t is equal to 0. When they go away, you see that when the overlapping is less, you see the correlation is decreasing. When the overlapping is even less, the correlation is decreasing. And this is how you get the correlation function. And instead of just for a fluorescence signal, you can just replace this AT, which we just used to define any random function. You can just replace AT with del F, which basically nothing but the change in the fluorescence fluctuations. So instead of AT, we are just monitoring the change in fluorescence fluctuation as a function of time and as a function time after some time. So we can define the correlation function for FCS, the simplest correlation function, the simplest when there is no complication. The simplest correlation function can be defined like this. When FT, del FT is nothing but a change in fluorescence intensity of FT and average of F of T. What are the factors that affect this fluorescence signal? If you just define this FT, you can see that the quantum aid of the fluorescence that affects the fluorescence signal. WR, what is WR? I'll again, I'll explain that thing in the next slide. WR is the observation volume. What is the volume that you are observing in this excitation area? As I said, the excitation area could be very bigger, but you can observe, you can still use the simplest pinhole and you monitor a small observation area. So that is the observation volume. What is the observation volume? I'll tell you how to calculate that thing. And it also depends upon the concentration. So these are the factors that affect the fluorescence signal. And now I'll just explain. So how you set up a fluorescence correlation instrument in your laboratory. It's not very difficult. Once I explain the instrument, you can see that setting up a fluorescence correlation spectroscopy is not very difficult, which is actually very helpful monitoring very fundamental processes and very interactions and many things. I'll give some examples also. So certainly you need a laser, and you don't need a very expensive laser to monitor to set up a fluorescence correlation spectroscopy. The laser power that we need is very, very, very less, because as I said, we are monitoring a very small area. As we are monitoring a very small area, we don't, and the number of molecules are very less there. You don't need a very high intensity signal there. Sometimes even like a 5 to 10 milliwatt laser is too good. 2 milliwatt laser is too good. You need to attenuate a 2 milliwatt laser. So you don't need a very expensive laser there. So you use a couple of mirrors to send the beams to a beam expander. So this is the setup of a beam expander, which increases the beam size. So once you expand the beam, you send the beam to the back focal length of the objective, and your sample is staying somewhere. So if you use a dichroic mirror, whatever fluorescence signal that you get here, that will come back to the same objective. So you have to use a dichroic mirror, which will separate the excitation signal and the emission signal. So once you get the emission signal, you can use another pinhole basically. So what I've done is I could have given a small pinhole here, or you can just use another pinhole on the emission side. That means you are just observing a small area. So through this pinhole, you get all the intensity from again a very small area. The fluorescence fluctuations or the fluorescence signals, I convinced you the signals that you are going to get are not like the conventional fluorescence you see in a spectropolarimeter. Rather, you get the fluctuations, and from those fluctuations only you calculate the autocorrelation function. So you get the signal, you send it to a detector. So a detector could be a QPD mostly, or APD, which is a avalanche photodiode. And if the intensity is less, you can put amplifier. But if you take a good APD, you don't need an amplifier even. You can just use the APD signal and send the signal to a correlator. Correlator basically correlates the signals and give you the fluctuation path. You send it to a computer, and there you get this curve. From there, where you get the average time that it's spent. Once you fit it, you can get the autocorrelation. You fit it to the autocorrelation function, the defined autocorrelation function. Then you can find out how much time the molecules spend in that excitation volume, and from there you get a lot of information. Sometimes, as I said, because your concentration is very less and you are observing a very small area, if you use a direct laser beam, that will hamper your fluorophores. Many of the times, that photopolizes the fluorophore, and you get a background because of that also. So instead of using a very bright laser beam, what can be done? A evanescent wave can be also used to excite fluorophores, and as I have explained in the first lecture when I was explaining single molecule rate imaging, I have explained how evanescent beam is created. So, and I said there that evanescent beam actually travels few nanometers. So any molecules that are there in those nanometer resolutions can only get excited, and others will not get excited. If others will not get excited, that means you again reducing the background noise. Only you get the signals from the fluorophores, and only those fluorophores which are on the top layer of the sample. Another method that is getting popular is like nanoflow. So if you can define a chamber where only a very small hole is there, so instead of using a pinhole, you can just use that nano hole to monitor the signals, and you believe that very less molecules, very less molecules are coming through that nano hole, which again reduces the background signal. So now you understand that fluorescence correlation spectroscopy is truly a single molecule fluorescence technique, because the molecules are reduced and only few molecules are being visualized at a particular time from that small volume of excitation. So when you use this small volume of excitation, what you can see is you get these fluctuations when there are more number of molecules. The fluctuation is going to be like intense fluctuations, and when there are no molecules, you get a less fluctuation, but this fluctuation directly depends on the number of molecules inside that captured volume. And this is what you get in the this is what you actually get from the instrument, and then you use that correlator, a software-based system which will correlate this data and you feed it to autocorrelation functions. So you can find out the correlation, you can find out the concentration, you can find out the hydrodynamic radius, because hydrodynamic radius is directly proportional to the diffusion, and this is all our diffusion control processes. So diffusion plays an important role. That's the reason I explained what diffusion is. You can find the diffusion coefficient, you can find the brightness, average brightness, rate constant, then the size of particles, size of protein, DNA. You can find monitor if there is any change in protein corona, protein oligomerization, implicit protein DNA interaction, membrane dynamics, and quantity. So well, what this shows is like when the observed volume is more, and the concentration is more, you get a very high intensity. But if you see here, the fluctuation level is less. What it says is, if you have more number of molecules, or if the observation volume is higher, you get less fluctuation. And as I said, what we are monitoring in FCS is basically the fluctuation. You get less information. However, if the observation volume is less and the number of particles size is less and less, you get a details fluctuation. But if the volume size is same but the particle size increases, once the particle size increases, also we have read it in very early of our careers in inter or something. The size of the molecule directly proportional to the diffusion constant. So you get less fluctuation there, as you can see it here. So when the size is lesser, you get fast diffusion. You get some short time stay, because if the because molecule is moving very fast, it will stay less time in the observation volume, and also you get fast fluctuations. If the size is small, you get fast diffusion. No, I actually made a mistake. It's slow diffusion. It's fast time as short time stay and slowed fluctuations. I probably just copied it and forgot to change it, but just correct it in that way. Okay. Now, how the fluctuations look like and how you get the correlation function, and how I said the number of molecules. Once the number of molecules increases, the fluctuation decreases. This is the example. Let's say we have the observation volume like this, and the particle is moving. When this is comes there, you get a fluctuation. But if the and you get a autocorrelation function like this from this signal fluctuations. But if the particle size is more, it will the rate of diffusion is going to be slow. It will stay more time in this area, so you get a wider distribution of the fluctuations. And once you get a wider distribution of fluctuations, you get you can see that fluctuation the autocorrelation function is shifting towards the right and getting more wide. And in similar way, if the size keeps increasing, we can see this autocorrelation function shifting towards time and getting broader and broader. Slope is getting increased also. If there are more number of molecules, so just compare this case versus this case. If there are more number of molecules where there are one molecule, if even the size is same, so what do you see? Coming inside, and because at a particular time there are more number of molecules inside, and when there are more number of molecules in the medium, there is a chance that if the observation volume has some number of molecules always inside the system, you can see there is fluctuation, but the fluctuation is upshifted because there are already some molecules inside. Because there are already some molecules inside, so those molecules are giving some intensity, and then the upcoming molecule which came inside got some additional fluctuations, and you get. So you can see that if the number of molecules are there, fluctuations are there, but it is upshifted. So if the number of molecules increases, this shifting increases. So for a if you plot the autocorrelation function for a single molecular less number of molecules, you get a curve like this. But as number of molecules increases, the fluctuation increases, because fluctuation directly depends, inversely depends upon the number of molecules. Why fluctuation inversely depends on the number of molecules? I just give a small animation. Had it been a direct session, I could ask you directly, but I'll just request you to answer these questions to yourself based upon whatever I'll show you in the next few seconds. Okay, what I'm going to show you, I'll show you a big circle and some small dots inside the circle, and ask you how many dots you see in the big circle, and you try to answer to yourself. So how many small dots you see inside? If I ask how many small dots you saw in the upper and lower big circle, I'm sure your answer is going to be 1 and 2. If I ask the same question again, how many dots you saw in the upper and lower big circle? Probably the answer is not going to be that easy. Okay, this is what the situation was. So initially there was 1 dot here and 1 dot here, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dots and are here, and about 8, 9 to 10 dots are here. So this clearly says that if the number of molecules in the observed area is less, the detector sees the fluctuation clearly. If the molecule number increases, the fluctuations are not predominant. So we don't see the fluctuations clearly. That's why in my previous slide, I said the fluctuation directly inversely proportional to the number of molecules present. That means the fluctuations are harder to see if the number of particles are higher. Well, the Dowdy, how much time it spent, or how much time it spent in the observation volume, is directly inversely proportional to the diffusion constant. Also, it inversely directly proportional to the molecular weight, number of the refractive index of the medium, and if there are few particles, you see a correlation function like this. If you are monitoring some kind of interaction where those small particles are interacting with big particles, I have already said the fluctuation becomes wider, and the amplitude of the fluctuations becomes smaller, and as it goes up, the amplitude again becomes smaller, and it gets broadened up and slower, and the slope increases because of these relationships. So the diffusion constant can be related to the correlation functions. Stokes-Einstein's constant can be calculated using this, and from the Stokes-Einstein's constant, we can pretty much find out all those scores. So for a fast diffusion, we get a correlation like this. For a slow diffusion, we get a correlation like this. Suppose like you can say that it's something like monomer to dimeric thing is happening. We are monitoring the diffusion of some polymers, some proteins, or from DNA, or some dye-molecules. You can see those things. Some of the time you can see that diffusion, the autocorrelation function is affected with the presence of some exponential components, some triplet interaction, some diffusion. So mostly this area is the area where you get the information of the triplet functions, we get any exponential functions, excited state dynamics, and you get the diffusion constants. And you can define this autocorrelation functions inside the observed volume using this model. Okay, let not go to the mathematics of how I derive these autocorrelation functions, but you can pretty much see this autocorrelation function has 3 components. One is the component for the one is the x component, one is the y component, one is the z component. Here you can see this, all of this x, y, and z component, they contains a factor w squared 0 by 4d, which is nothing but the correlation time, the diffusion time we have already discussed. So this is the diffusion time, w0 square by 4d. So each of this factor contains the contribution of this diffusion time inside this observation volume. So the observation volume W0 in x and y direction, it is almost same if you check, but in z direction it's not same usually, because we cannot get a circular spot, we get a cylindrical spot. But you can define the W0 if the absorption volume in Z component is Z0, we can define then that Z0 as a constant times W0. It could be some K times W0. We can explain that thing to make the equation easier. So the volume in X direction is W0, in Y direction in W0, and in Z direction is KW0. This function, the C times, you can see this pi 3 by 2 W square 0 by Z0 is nothing but the volume, the observation volume. So this is the observation volume. So effective volume where we are monitoring the correlation function. So this is C into the observation volume. That is, if you take C into the observation volume, that is nothing but the number of molecules that stays in this observation volume. So this is N. So you can get the number of particles. So this factor tells the number of particles, and this is what I explained. The autocorrelation function inversely proportional to the number of molecules, number of particles stay inside the observation volume times the contribution of that correlation time inside that observation volume. So as this W0 are same in X and Y direction, we can simply find this equation like 1 by N. As I said, this is nothing but N. I explained it here. So this is 1 by N, 1 plus tau by tau d square, as tau d is W0 by 4D. So this is 1 by tau d square to power minus 1. But in Z direction, it is K square tau d to minus R. And G infinite. G, it could be usually converged to 1. I have shown you the autocorrelation function. The autocorrelation graph usually converges to 1 in ideal case, but sometimes because other factors are there, sometimes it doesn't converge to 1. That's why I have just written G infinite, but G infinite is usually 1 because the maximum correlation that we can get is 1. So how this equation helps us? That helps us finding out if you have, like, let's say, two. If you want to, let's say, standardize your FCS, if you want to calibrate your FCS, if you have a dial, let's say you have some dial, rhodamine 60 or something, which diffusion constant, you know, which hydrodynamic radius, you know, and if you have another system which you want to monitor the diffusion hydrodynamic radius, or you can see that you can just monitor those two things in your FCS. From this autocorrelation function, you can find out TD. Now you know the TD. So TD1 and D1 is known for one system. TD2 you can find out from this fitting, and from there you can find out W0, and once you find out W0, you can find out other parameters as well. I'm just keeping bit fast because we are going ahead of time. So you can find out the autocorrelation function, the hydrodynamic radius, the tau d of unknown samples, comparing that with a known sample. So this is the model, whatever model I have explained. That model is for a will go well if only one particle is there in your absorption volume, but that is not always the case. There could be more than one particle, so there could be two particles. In that case, you have to consider modifying the autocorrelation functions, where we have to have the contribution from both the particles. So and you can use that autocorrelation function. So you can define the autocorrelation function. I think I defined that thing for a three-dimensional illuminated profile. You can find out from there. We saw that I'm just summarizing whatever autocorrelation function things we learned previously. So we learned that the autocorrelation function inversely proportional to the number of molecules. The diffusion constant is related to the diffusion time TD. So we can find out the diffusion constant from there also, as 0 by 4D. we know that the hydrodynamic radius we can estimate from the Stokes dynamic Stokes Einstein equation, as we know the diffusion constant. So once we find out the diffusion constant, we can find out the hydrodynamic radius from this equation. So once you correlate your data, once you get the autocorrelation function, you can find out all this diffusion coefficient, hydrodynamic radius, and many things. So when you monitor the FCS, there could be many processes that can happen. There could be three-dimensional diffusion. There could be two-dimensional diffusion if one dimension is somehow being restricted. There could be active transport, just one molecule passing through the beam profile. That could be anomalous diffusion, just random diffusion passing through that. And in that case, the important thing is you have to find out a perfect model to fit the autocorrelation function. And as I said, whatever signal, whatever processes that gives you a fluctuation in the fluorescence lifetime, you can pretty much use all those processes. You can monitor all those processes using fluorescence correlation spectroscopy. So there's something called cross correlation. What is cross correlation? Suppose let's explain in this way. So you have the signal in absorbed volume. What you can do instead of, so in FCS, in fluorescence correlation spectroscopy, we just monitor the intensity from a single detector at two different times. What you can do, you can monitor the signals at two detectors at the same time or at two detector time, and you can correlate that. This is autocorrelation. So you are correlating the signals of the same function in two detectors, in detector 1 and detector 2. So you are monitoring the same sample at two detectors. So you can define the autocorrelation time like this. I'm not explaining it, but G12, some of the expressions, if you find this references, you can find some are writing like 1, 2. That means it's a autocorrelation between two particles. Or could be, if it is G2, that is sometimes it is written as cross correlation. When you are just, instead of monitoring the signals of the same particle at two detectors, you monitor the signal of two different particles at two detectors and you correlate it. Let's say if you are monitoring the cross correlation of the same signal at a time t in detector 1, and so you are just monitoring the same signal for a time over a time period. So from one detector, you get the fluctuation at a particular time t. From the second detector, you get the fluctuation at a time t plus tau. You can pretty much find out the autocorrelation function. So finding the autocorrelation function is not that easy, but you are just using two detectors to find out the fluctuations. So instead of looking for the autocorrelation, you can just look for the cross correlation for two different particles. So this is how it happens. So two molecules, you get the signals, get the photon burst in this way. One channel get this and another channel get this. So you just monitor the change in intensity at these two channels, and you can monitor it. But when you have multiple interactions, suppose you want to monitor multiple interactions using multiple fluorophores, then instead of looking for the cross correlation or autocorrelation, you look for two color cross correlation. This is how it happens. Suppose you have, suppose you are monitoring some interaction. For example, just you are monitoring some DNA interaction or DNA protein interactions. Suppose you have tagged one DNA with a fluorophore, and you have tagged the protein with a fluorophore. So when you start monitoring the interactions, once it starts diffusing in the diffusion volume, if there is no interaction, you see they are not interacting. But if there is interaction, you see a different. Like I have already tested if there is like a single particles, how the fluctuation will look. If there are multiple fluctuation particles, all the fluctuations will look. So you can see this kind of fluctuations there. And suppose you can just use different type of filters to separate the two colors that you get, the two fluorophores. Let's say you are using Psi3 and Psi5, two different signals. So if you use a 640 dichroic mirror, you can separate the Psi3 signal and Psi5 signal, because so once you and send the signals to two different detectors. So one of the detectors get only the detectors from one the fluctuation from one fluorophore. Another detectors get the fluctuation from another fluorophore. Then you see when there is no correlation, you can just discard those things and consider only those molecules when there is a cross correlation. So that means only you are considering those molecules. So this is a best way of following fluorescence cross correlation is one of the best way to monitor any kind of binding. So you want to see if it ligand is binding to a protein or DNA is binding to a protein. So you don't get it as long they are not bound, or if there is some kind of like same interaction also, you don't see them, but you only get the cross correlation when there is an interaction. So you can pretty much find out those intensity and define the cross correlation function. And there's another method of FCS which is getting familiar nowadays, is like called as scanning FCS. So instead of monitoring at a particular area, what you can do, you can scan at different positions. That you can do. The easiest way that is to keep moving the space. So your beam is constant and your sample is here, let's say. You can keep moving, scan, then move the sample, scan, move the sample, scan, and you can generate autocorrelation function. In that case, you can see that the autocorrelation function, when there is like a regular scanning, you get an autocorrelation function like this. But when you are doing a FCS scanning, because FCS scanning, suppose these are the molecules, these are the volumes we excited over a sample. So when you are scanning here, you get some fluctuation. When the space is moving and there are no molecule, you don't get any signal. Then you get some more signal. You get no signal, you get more signal. So this is how the fluctuations you observe in the scanning FCS. And there also you can correlate and find out different kind of images. You can construct an image, scanning image. Like you can do this scanning in two ways. You can do the scanning in a linear fashion, or you can do the scanning in a circular fashion, and you can get information. You can even construct the three-dimensional picture of a sample, like the way this article describes here, where they have monitored the formation of giant unilamellar vesicles. So once the vesicle is formed, and they have given some labeled proteins which specially bound to the boundaries of the vesicles, you can see those things using scanning FCS. And you get more resolution using this scanning FCS. And this is what I have explained. Sometimes you can just do an image correlation, as I said. So if you scan it, you can do image correlation. So for image correlation, what you can do is you just use the ledger, and whatever signals you get, you send it to different detectors, and from the detectors you create at different times, you monitor the create the image, scan, and create the image, and eventually you can get a three-dimensional graph. And you can monitor slow and static diffusion, static distribution. If there is static distribution, there is dynamic distribution, you can monitor all these things. You can, once you get this autocorrelation functions, you can create a three-dimensional object from there. So this is how you create the image, I think. So, and these are some examples where you can monitor protein binding. I just skipped the imaging details of the things. So you can monitor dimerization of a protein. If some protein is binding the DNA or passing through a membrane or something, you can monitor those dimerizations. You can, if there is protein-protein interaction, or if there is a spectral cross step, you can monitor those things using a dual excited signature, using phosphorylation spectroscopy. If you check the number of publications that are coming nowadays in the field of fluorescence correlation spectroscopy, you can see that the number of publications are constantly increasing. That is only because the usefulness of this fluorescence correlation spectroscopy, usefulness of this single molecule method. There are the first advantages is it's not very difficult to set up. So the setup procedure is very easy. It's not a very expensive tool also, but you can develop your own fluorescence correlation spectroscopy setup to monitor very sophisticated processes, very fundamental life processes and biological processes, fast processes, using this instrument. And unlike the other two methods that I have described in the previous lectures, where many of the times you have to like surface tether the molecule of your interest, which is in fact a limitation of fluorescence spread imaging, fluorescence spread spectroscopy, which induces some kind of restrictions to your molecule. Here you do not have to restrict your molecule. In optical tweezer also, it induces some restriction on the molecule by attaching a bead or by applying some force. Here you are not doing anything. You are just monitoring the system as such, and you are monitoring the fluctuations. And that is the reason the number of publications using fluorescence correlation spectroscopy is increasing day by day. So this comes to an end of the fluorescence correlation spectroscopy. There are many things that I have not described here. How you correlate the function, how do you choose which model fits after seeing the signals, and many more things I have not described here because of shortage of timing. But anyone who is interested can easily communicate with me. You can, nowadays it's not very difficult to get the contact information. Those who wants to understand fluorescence correlation spectroscopy in details, or any of the other methods, single molecule methods, and how you use this kind of tools in your checking out real biophysical problems, you can contact me, you can discuss with me. And this is the end of the theory classes of single molecule spectroscopy. And the next